by being withholding, you know, all those things that we learned to do to protect ourselves that felt like they were saving us as children, and that really were survival mechanisms and emotionally adaptive to our early environment.
But we don't need them when we get older.
We don't need them when we're adults, and you know, we can really let ourselves have very different experiences, and we can really learn to love, both to be able to be loving towards somebody else, but also to accept love.
Yes, to receive it.
You know, and that, I think that's just
that's
as hard.
That's usually the hardest thing.
Yeah, but it's so interesting. People still think, or they imagine in their minds, that they still need to have all the things they had in the past, or they can't have love, they can't have something new. And until they go through certain steps, like giving up a pattern of control or giving up a pattern of withholding, and go through the emotional experience and some of the anxiety from being different, they're never going to know that they don't need all that stuff they had as a child. They don't need their defenses anymore. Yeah, but you have to take a chance. It's almost like you have to throw down your crutches before you know you can really walk. And that's the part of therapy that is like the action-oriented part, where you really have to take the steps, hang in there with the anxiety that comes up, and then learn that, hey, look, I'm not going to die. I'm actually going to have a better life.
Right. And I think people don't understand that there's no positive behavioral change without anxiety. You know, when you start to try on new behaviors, even that are more positive for yourself, you're going to feel anxious. And when you don't, and when you stop engaging in behaviors that are self-destructive, you're going to feel anxious.
It's like people giving up drugs.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of those self-destructive behaviors that's self-soothing, but that's actually destroying your life. But to give it up feels you go through a lot of anxiety, and you have to sweat, and but then you'll have more in your life if you can go through that anxiety. And you're really sort of going against an inner coach that you have, a whole thought process that feels like it's out to protect you, particularly in relationships. You know, don't trust, you know, him, he's kind of, you know, like this, and he's probably going to hurt you, and don't trust her, she's blah, 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 you know, and you get all this coaching going on that really keeps you from really investing or taking a chance with a new partner.
And giving all of yourself.
And giving all of yourself, really, and letting them in and letting them give to you either. And, you know, if you stay in that defended state, you can sort of, you know, have a view of how your life's going to go. It's not going to be very pretty, but you know how it's on this sort of predictable course. And I think part of what scares people is when they let go of some of those defenses, then they really feel the poignancy of their life. They start to feel really valuing of their life. They really don't know where it's going to go. They don't know how far it's going to develop. And all that's positive. That's a real adventure that they're on. But there's some anxiety in that adventure. But the person's really developing and challenging their boundaries. And an ideal relationship, each person's kind of co-evolving. You know, they're pushing each other to develop in a positive way rather than shutting down aspects of each other.
And in that sort of allowing each person, because the problem is often in relationships, people are scared of the change. So when the partner makes a change, the other one tries to stop them making it, to hold on to what was there before. So it's almost being confident enough to allow each person to evolve and grow and
and there is always that fear when our partner starts to change, and I always tell people you have a lot of power to change your relationship. You have zero power to change this person over here, but you can change your half of the dynamic. And then when you change your half of the dynamic, the other person's going to have to do something different. And sure, that's going to make them anxious. They're not necessarily going to like it a whole lot, but it's going to allow them to grow and develop as well. And then they start changing, and then you get anxious, you know, and you know, it's a process back and forth.
Do you think any relationship can be solved? You know, there's so many. Do you think a lot of people get divorced when they don't need to, or break up when they don't need to?
I think a lot of times that they do. I mean, I think it's mixed. I don't think that anybody should stay in a situation that's actually dangerous to them.
Of course not.
And I wouldn't endorse that.
Rihanna and Chris Brown.
No, I'm not saying absolutely you should stay in a relationship, but I do think it is hard to develop yourself in terms of your relationship skills outside of a relationship too. So I do think you have to be vulnerable and take some chances, because if you wait for the perfect partner, it's sort of like waiting till you're going to be a perfect parent to have a child, and we don't have no children. You know, if we wait for the perfect relationship, we won't have relationships either. So it's taking some chances, and you know, allowing ourselves to try some new behaviors. But you know, a lot of times what's happened in a relationship when it's gone dead or it's gone bad is that they formed a fantasy bond or an illusion of connection. And this is one of my father's main concept of his theory is. And a fantasy bond, the initial fantasy bond is with our parent. When a baby's in distress and in pain and their needs aren't being met right at that immediate moment, even when the mother's left the room to go get the bottle, they start to have a fantasy of her still being there to calm themselves down. And what we start to do very early on is to parent ourselves the way we were parented, to both soothe ourselves and to punish ourselves, much as we were treated early in our life. So we form this fantasy bond of being sort of pseudo-independent. We can take care of ourselves. We're the mother and ourselves, all in one, the all-powerful parent and the helpless baby. And often what we do then in our romantic relationships is we recreate that, where we either find somebody who's going to treat us like our parent and we play out being the child, or we treat somebody the way our parent treated us and they become the child in the situation. Or if all else fails, we do it to ourselves again. So when the relationship ends, people think, oh, my problems are going to be over because I'm getting rid of this terrible person who's so critical of me. And what they find when they get rid of that person is they have to take back all those self-criticisms because they're really their own way of thinking about themselves.
Oh my God.
So often, they think it's all going to be solved, it's all going to be over, and yet it's all recreated. They feel worse because they realize all that self-hatred and all that criticism is really in them. They just projected that onto their partner.
Put up with it otherwise.
Absolutely. And they wouldn't have been drawn to a person who criticized them like that if it didn't fit. So
it's fascinating.
Yes. So, and
like
often when a relationship,
big Chinese puzzle. Really.
It's a big
No, it's
puzzle.
interesting. A lot of people wonder about this fantasy bond, but they don't know the power of the human imagination. They've done some experiments along these lines about how fantasy images can really relieve very serious states of deprivation. During World War II, they took a group of about 200 conscientious objectors and they subjected them to a year-long experiment where they kept them right below the starvation level, just bare sustenance level. They found that these men daydreamed and dreamed, but they fantasized and daydreamed about food endlessly. But the interesting point of this is when they were daydreaming about the food, their hunger pangs, physical hunger pangs, actually decreased to a significant extent. So the child is able to use this fantasy of that his mother is still with him, that they're still connected in some way, but also beginning self-soothing habits like sucking their thumb, rubbing a blanket. And this is what lends itself to making them feel like, hey, I can just take care of myself. I don't need people. I don't need anybody. I don't need my mother. She's so unreliable. And so then when you get married, you eventually, at first you're probably really relating in a real way, because at the time that people usually first meet, are going toward independence. They've dropped some of their defenses a little bit. Not all the time, but most of the time they are.
And we're not as critical in the beginning.
We're not as critical, and we get together but there's feelings of love, excitement, but there's also, along with those really joyful feelings, there's also this feeling of anxiety and other things come up, sadness, grief from the past, that start to come up in people's minds. But sometimes even before this anxiety or these feelings from the past reach conscious level, people will do something to push the other person away. Like, for example, an example we always give is this man and woman were on their honeymoon, and she